today we are continuing our discussion on ecology with niches and community interactions. So if you've ever used or seen this word before, odds are you might have. So if somebody says, oh, I have really niche interests, or something is described as niche, that is kind of where, or that word kind of stems from this word. So in biology, it's typically pronounced niche, but like niche and niche are going to get you the same way. So, we are going to talk about what exactly an organism's niche is, as well as the interactions that can exist in an ecosystem that kind of help sustain and support our discussions on biogeological cycling and energy transfer. But first, we're going to describe the word tolerance in a biological context. So, tolerance in like a colloquial context, we talk about, oh, like somebody's like lactose intolerance, so they can't tolerate lactose, or when somebody's being really, really annoying and somebody's like, you just kind of have to tolerate them. In a biology, tolerance is more like whether or not they can tolerate their entire environment, not just one specific thing. So every species has its own ability to survive. And reproduce under a range of environmental circumstances. Though that range is known as their tolerance. So something like a panda who only eats a certain diet and only lives in a certain ecosystem has really, really low tolerance. It can't withstand a whole lot. But something like a rat that lives on the streets of New York, that has really, really high tolerance. They can survive a range of temperatures, a range of ecosystems, a range of foods. So if we're out of range, that creates stress. So if there's not enough food in an ecosystem, or if a certain, like if the water in an aquatic ecosystem gets too hot, it could create stress on the organisms, the entire population, or the entire ecosystem. Just gonna make this really long. Tolerance helps determine habitat. Habitat, get the actual definition, is just the general place an organism lives. That's both biotic and abiotic factors. So a lot of times, if you go to a zoo, they're like, oh, that's the koala habitat, that's the bear habitat, because that is where the koalas live, where the bears live. What they can tolerate determines where they live. Because if you can't tolerate a certain amount of, if you can't tolerate a certain pH in the soil, you're not going to live in a place where the pH is higher than that. But ecologists don't just want an address, they want to know more. So, ecologists don't just want an address. They want an occupation. I'm putting occupation in quotes because it's the closest thing to a job that an organism can have when we're talking about an ecosystem. And that is where we get niches. So if a habitat is your address, your niche would be your job. It is the role something plays in an ecosystem. More detail, a niche is the range of physical and environmental conditions in which a species lives, so where it lives. The physical and environmental. Whoops, sorry. So your niche is your habitat and the way the species obtains what it needs to survive and reproduce. So let's say a squirrel needs to eat 5 walnuts in a day in order to have enough energy to survive and to reproduce. So if it lives in an oak tree and it scavenges for, or I guess hunts or gathers for walnuts, that oak tree, the walnuts it eats, and the way it gets those walnuts would be considered its niche. If we think about, so think about a hyena, right? If a hyena lives in the desert, where it lives, its habitat in the desert, the dead lion that it eats, and the act of scavenging to get that dead lion would be considered that hyena's niche. That makes sense? So if animals had jobs, which they don't, but if animals had jobs, they get paid with energy. The amount of work that they put in to obtain that energy would be considered its job. It doesn't have to go to work to get money. It has to run around and hunt to get food. That's its job. That's its niche. There are 3 components to a niche. So components. We're going to make a little chart. They are resources, abiotic factors and biotic factors. All these things come together to create an organism's niche. So we've got resources, so necessities of life. We're talking space, water, nutrients, light. Those would be considered resources, and the resources something uses is considered a part of its niche. We've got abiotic factors. These are also needed for survival. Things like water. A certain weather pattern. So there's kind of overlap between resources and abiotic factors. Water is considered in both of them. But the climate that an organism needs to survive, the temperature, isn't necessarily a resource. So that's why we have to have abiotic factors as a kind of section on its own. So there is some overlap, but not entirely overlapped. So water could be considered a resource, but if you need water to have your babies in it, it would also be considered an abiotic factor. We also have biological aspects of a niche. So we've got our biotic factors that are, guess what, needed for survival. Anything from food and mates that are needed for reproduction. This would all be considered biotic factors in an organism's niche. Sorry, my sock's falling off. So, any questions about what specifically a niche is? Okay. So, now we're going to kind of dive head first into interactions and relationships, which I think is one of the cooler aspects of biology. So, interactions and relationships. Not sure if I've said this in this class before, but if you're a shorthand person, somebody who likes to write in shorthand so they can write really quickly, something I learned is that interactions could really easily be abbreviated I/A. So if I accidentally do that, or if you just like to write in shorthand, I find that one to be very helpful, especially in the sciences. So, interactions. The first one we are going to talk about, we'll make it red, is competition. Competition. So, competition happens when more than one organism attempts to use various resources. There are two main types. One is interspecific or intraspecific. Intraspecific. The other one is interspecific. So it is really easy to get these mixed up. Intraspecific is within a species. So let's say if I just pulled out an entire pizza, set it right here and said, come and get it. There'd be some competition. There's not enough for everybody. You as human beings would have intra-specific competition to get that pizza. Inter-specific is between species. If a pack of wild dogs burst into the classroom and also tried to get the pizza, and somebody decided that they were going to fight for it, that would be inter-specific. If you can think of a really good mnemonic device to help you remember this, I would appreciate it. Usually, I think with the A, I would say, oh, that is a species. So there's only one species. So it's not the best mnemonic in the world, but it works for me. So intra-specific is within a species. Inter-specific has multiple species competing. Competition, or the concept of competition, gives rise to something called the competitive exclusion principle. The competitive exclusion principle. This states that no two species can occupy the exact same niche in the exact same habitat at the same time. So, let's say we've got two types of birds. We got a red bird and a blue bird. Both the red bird and the blue bird need a specific pine tree to make its nests. They both eat the same kind of worms in the same general area, and they both move into the same pine tree. That would be two separate species occupying the exact same niche at the exact same time. They both use the same methods to get worms. They both live in the same tree in the same forest. What will happen is that one of them will be better at competing and the other will be excluded. Which is just fancy talk for dying out. We'll say the red bird. See, the red bird's just a little beefier. Gets up a little earlier. A little bit better at scaring off the bluebirds. Eventually, those bluebirds won't have the ability to get the food, the resources they need, and they will die out. That is the competitive exclusion principle. Essentially, if you got more than one species occupying the same niche, the same habitat, at the same time, one of them will eventually die out. Any questions? The competitive exclusion principle leads us to divide resources. So, in order to kind of take a load off or avoid confrontation, species will divide resources instead of compete. Bless you. So, division and competition, bless you again. So both of them put together helps determine the number and kinds of species in a community. As well as the niche each one occupies. I have a graphic for this. Give me 1 second, I'm gonna grab it. Beautiful. Now I can't find it, even though I had it. Okay, so let's say we have a tree, right? And all of these birds want to live in this tree, in this area. As you can see, their beaks are all kind of shaped the same way. So they can all eat the same types of food. But competition and division of resources allows each one to occupy a different niche in the same tree. So let's say that the Cape May warbler and the Blackburnian warbler moved in at the same time. They both liked the same types of food, and they both lived in the same general place. Competition, or like just territorial fighting, kind of divided one onto one half of the tree and the other into the other half of the tree. So they started building different types of nests. This one is really good at building nests that combat the winds that blow through the tree this way. The other one doesn't have to worry about the winds because the tree blocks it. So eventually, it got to the point where only these guys can live on this side of the tree because their species knows how to make the special wind-resistant nests. Or let's say that these two birds both liked to live in the middle of the tree, and they both ate the same type of stuff. But eventually, the green warbler got really good at finding berries. Their eyes were trained to find those berries quickly. While This species got really good at like cracking open pine cones. So eventually, over time, it got to the point where the green warbler's diet was almost all berries, and the bay warbler's diet was almost all pine cones. So now they can live in the same area. They've divided resources, so they no longer occupy the same niche. So they can all coexist in the same tree at the same time. That makes sense? Clear it up a little bit? Cool. So, quick talk about the different relationships that can exist in an ecosystem. This is really important because you will have a activity for one of your hybrid days over this real soon. Also, like the key takeaway from this lesson are our different types of relationships. So, the first one we're going to talk about are predator-prey relationships. In a predator-prey relationship, one animal captures and kills the other. Say the coyotes that run around in the woods capture and kill the wild rabbits that live out in the woods. Predator-prey relationships affect both population size and location. The amount of bunnies that the coyotes eat determines the population of bunnies. But if the bunny population gets so low that it can't feed a huge coyote population, some of the coyotes will starve. So their population size depends on the population size of each other. Also, location. If wolves live in a certain area, bunnies are going to try to not live in that same area. We also have herbivory, which is essentially just herbivores feed on producers. This affects the size, distribution, and location of plants. Now, this next type of relationship should be a buzzword. Like, ring a bell in your brain. This is kind of important. Jot this down, highlight this. Symbiosis. Symbiosis are the different types of relationships that come with organisms living with one another. There are three main types that we are going to talk about. Sim, so simultaneous, biosis, living together. There are 3 types of symbiotic relationships that we are going to discuss. They are parasitism, mutualism, and commensalism. Parasitism, mutualism, and commensalism. Now, odds are you've interacted with, either learned about, or dealt with some sort of parasitic relationship. Parasitism happens when one organism lives on or in another and harms it or weakens it. They usually don't die because the parasite still wants to live on or in it. Like, it wouldn't kill its food source. So they usually don't die. So if you've ever had to take a dog to a vet because it has worms, or if you've ever gotten or know someone who has gotten head lice, or if you've ever gone and spent a day in the woods and came back and there were ticks in your hair on your arms, you've interacted with a parasitic relationship. They want to live on or in an organism. They thrive off of it. It's how they get their nutrients. But it leads to some sort of harm coming to the host. In a mutualistic relationship, both benefit. So, in the rainforest, really cool. In the rainforest, there is a special kind of fungus that likes to grow underneath the earth. Sometimes ant colonies take that fungus, bring it back to their colony, and farm it. Because this fungus produces sugars that the ants can use. So the fungus gets a place to live. The ants are bringing it nutrients. And the ants get sugars from this fungus. Super, super cool. Both benefit the ants because they get sugar, and the fungus because it has a place to live. Mutualistic relationships. The last one we're going to talk about is commensalism. In a commensalistic relationship, one benefits and one is neutral. So neither harmed or hurt. So if you've ever seen those pictures of those whales that have the barnacles that are kind of stuck to the side of it, those barnacles kind of hitch a free ride on that whale and get nutrients through the filter feeding that happens as they move through the water. Whale does not care. It's just chilling. It barely even feels them. So the whale's not harmed or hurt but the barnacles get the benefit of being able to move around. So we'll put our little examples on here. This is a bonkers chart. All right, let's see. So example, we've got like which one do we want to use? We'll use ticks. Tick gets stuck in your arm, feeds off you. It benefits because it gets all of the resources it needs. It gets that good nutrients, and you have some sort of pain response to it. Also, it's kind of gross, but fine. We'll get them off. Let's see. An example of a beneficial relationship or a mutualistic relationship. We'll put humans and dogs, right? Or pets. Those pets get a place to live, get the joy of just a warm house and full tummies. And we get some sort of emotional connection. So, humans and pets would be a mutualistic relationship as we all benefit from it. A commensalistic relationship, one is neutral, one benefits. That would be like our whales and barnacles. Any questions about these different types of relationships? No. All right.